Back with another solo Q&A, and it's one of my birthday specials. I've been doing these for the last 3 years and reflecting on the different lessons and considerations that I've had over the past year of attempting to grow up. I think we've got about 19 or 20 today, and I'm going to dive straight in. Number one, you cannot compete with someone having fun. When I think about the moments in life where I'm most in flow and I'm experiencing the most joy and fun and fulfillment, I honestly don't think anyone in the same domain can compete because I'm enjoying myself. And everyone that's listened to 330 about my move into self-employment and jumping before maybe necessarily I was perfectly ready for it, these last few months have showed me that I'm having so much fun with the sales coaching, with the conversations with my clients, with creating the content for my clients. It feels impossible not to just keep going. And I've said this quote many times in the podcast, and there'll be a klaxon somewhere that goes off, and it's from Tim Cook at Apple, and he says the tools will be heavy but they'll feel light in your hands. And so much of what I've done over the last few months, and if I include the podcast within that, over the last 5 and a bit years now, I've been having so much fun while doing it that I feel a lot of energy off the back of doing the work, which is converse to a lot of different experiences where you're working and you feel tired and drained afterwards. Of course, there's one day in particular that stands out where I did 5 podcasts back to back in London in April with a host of brilliant guests. And I was definitely cognitively tired afterwards, but the feeling that I had inside of fun and enjoyment and exploring things that I like to do was so good. And if I look at those that have come on the podcast as guests that have been so successful in their field, many times they are having fantastic fun along the way of building whatever they're building. Of course, there's stumbling blocks, and I'm recording this on the 31st of October. I'm doing some of my invoicing on Xero this morning, and that's not fun. But I know that the workshop that I get to deliver later this afternoon, or the slides that I'm preparing for a big set of presentations that I'm doing in November, I love doing those. And one of the first moments when I realized that this was going to be the case for the sales coaching was back in March. I was sat in the apartment that Bryce, my friend, and I were staying in the marina in Dubai, and I had a 2-hour coaching session with a new client, an ex-Irish pro rugby player who was moving from his career as a rugby player into a high-performance coaching role. And we were helping him build out his sales mindset, his communication principles, how he was going to structure his offer. And I sat for 2 hours and the time flew past, and I was gung-ho, and I was talking, I was loose, and he was enjoying it. He was getting a lot of value. I was teaching him things he'd never learnt before, because of course as a rugby player for the last 15 years as a professional, there would be no need for him to consider sales and communication on any level. And Bryce pulled me after the call had ended and we were about to go for dinner, and he was like, "You were loving that." And I nodded, because I had just had the best time for 2 hours. I had created energy, I'd given value, I'd created value, and I was being paid to do that. And it was that level of synergy between something I love to talk about and love helping people with. And if I can keep doing that and keep scaling that, it's going to be really hard to compete. And I'm not saying it's a zero-sum game where I have to beat other sales coaches or sales trainers or content creators to the finish line. But I truly believe that if somebody is going head to head with me in this field, or when it comes to being so consistent with the podcast, I'm having so much fun along the way. It feels impossible for me to possibly slow down or stop or be outcompeted by somebody that perhaps thinks that they can go head to head. And I want you to consider, what are some of the things that you like to do that are fun for you, that are enjoyable for you within your work, within your career, within your business, and double down on those aspects, because those are where your competitive advantage will lie down the line when the going potentially gets more challenging and gets tough, as it has done for me in July of this year in particular. I knew that I could lean into this side of myself where I was going to just have fun along the way. And guess what? A great business and a great client book and much more to come is being built off the back of that. Number 2 is opt in and out of content when it serves you. Again, to rewind to a solo Q&A that I did probably around episode 320, I was going through that redundancy period and I hadn't publicly been able to share it yet because I was still working through it. And I gave a warning that I was using my content diet and my palate that was consuming that within me very selectively at that moment in time, because I had a set amount of energy that had to be allocated to things that were more important. And at that point in time, I came off X for about 2 months because I was watching that content, particularly around the state of the UK, around some of the crimes around some of the hotels. And it was just making me angry. And I had to opt out of that content because it wasn't serving me at that moment in time. And then more recently, I was prepping for that last run of guests I did in London with Andrew Craig, David Bell, Eunice Rocks, Miles Usher Doyle. And in the lead up to that, I couldn't actually consume any of the usual podcast content I would consume on the likes of Modern Wisdom or Dive CEO or Joe Rogan or even Trigonometry, because the content I needed to consume was to get me ready to have great conversations with the guests that were coming up. So I opted out of my usual content diet to purely consume for a run of guests. When you're doing 4 or 5 in 2 days, you really need to be dialed in. And there's a level of research that I think if you're a regular listener to my show, you know that I hold myself to that standard. So there are points in time where you should opt in and out of the content you're consuming, whether that's music, and again, I talk a lot about frequency and the type of music you listen to, feeling that frequency and making you feel on that vibe. I hesitate to say this, but there will be times during your life when you're in an implementation phase and you might not have the time to listen to an hour of Canberra a week. I'll be very sad when that's the case, but there might be times where a guest comes up and you've got something really important that you're working on or working towards, and that particular guest or that particular topic that I'm putting out there doesn't serve you. Of course, I would encourage you to go back in the archive and find something that does. We've got over 330 now, so there's plenty to choose from. But opt out when it suits you, whether that's social media, whether that's music, whether that's Netflix, whether that's YouTube, whether that's just conversations that you're having with particular people. And I'm big on believing that that's the type of content we consume as well in the group chats we're in, and again, I'm in a lot of football group chats with other Rangers supporters. And there's times when I'm so busy, I can't possibly be engaging about what I think about the new manager or what I think about the lineup for the game against Hibs. That's really not as important to me at certain moments in time, whereas there's other moments in time where I have more bandwidth, more time, more energy, and I can get involved in those sorts of lighter conversations. So be very, very careful what you choose to consume, how often you consume it, when you consume it, and ensure what you're putting into your mind, your eyes, your ears, and any other orifices you've got that you're consuming content through, that it serves you at that moment in time and it's done with intention. Number 3, the sunk cost fallacy could be destroying your potential. It's been a while since I've talked about the sunk cost fallacy, but in layman's terms, to bring it to life, the idea that because we've always done something, we should always continue doing something, or that we've invested so much time or energy or money into something that it would be crazy to quit now, can be very, very damaging. There will be 2 types of people listening to this podcast. There'll be those of us who can be guilty of the sunk cost fallacy and continue to invest in something and continue to flog a dead horse because it's seen as a sign of consistency and commitment. And then there'll be those of us that hop, skip and jump between things too often and get shiny object syndrome. I'm speaking more to the former group, because you must understand consistency is a virtue, it is a value, it is something that has great returns on it. However, there will be times in your life where you must leave something behind, kill it off, move on to the next thing, because to believe that the sunk cost you put into that should tie you to it moving forward is a fallacy and a mistake, and it can be stopping you from doing the next thing, which could be much more beneficial for you. One of my favourite guests of 2023 was Adam Power. He is an Irish guy who used to run a marketing agency, and he now has moved into a thing called Powered University and Powered Media. And he was speaking about choosing the right vehicle to serve you. And if I reflect on my own story, many know that I made the move from insurance in 2021 into the world of furniture sales. And the vehicle that I chose allowed me to use the same skill sets as a salesperson, but earn markedly more money. In fact, I doubled my income after 18 months. And if I had tied myself and thought about the sunk cost that I'd left of 7 years of gaining experience and a reputation within the insurance sector and not made the move to the slightly less glamorous, less reputable sector of furniture, then I would have made a tremendous mistake and I would have blunted my potential that I was working towards. When you're listening to this, consider some of the things that you're spending your time and your energy on just now. Are they the vehicle that's going to take you to where you want to go? are they the right things to be investing your time and energy into? Not just because you've always done them, not just because you've spent a lot of time, money, and effort on them, but because they're something that in 5 years, 10 years, that version of yourself will be happy with.
These days, it feels like every brand is shouting about how supplements are the answer to everything and all your problems. Before you jump on the latest wellness trend, it's worth remembering the foundations and basics come first. Hydration, good nutrition, rest, movement are the real keys. When you do decide to supplement, however, what you choose really does matter. You know I'm a big fan of removing toxins and unnecessary things from your lifestyle, and I ensure that my supplements are free from additives, artificial flavors, and any unnecessary, dirty, toxic fillers. Personally, having seen many professional athletes and top performers utilize their products, I decided to give Pure Sport supplements a go. Their products are built on science-backed information, minimal ingredients, and they do exactly what they're meant to. Whether it's their best-selling ultra electrolytes to keep you hydrated and energized, their deep magnesium to support with quality sleep, or even their natural testosterone boosting Tonka Ali, I trust that what they make is developed to care for me and my body. Explore the full range of Pure Sport supplements at the link in the show notes, puresport.co, and use the code CAMBRO10 for 10% off.
Number 4 is a little bit of a deep one. Time is a social construct. It moves at different rates depending on many factors. This is something I've been thinking more and more about, because there's ways and moments where 2025 has felt like a blink of an eye, and then there's other moments where 2025 seems like a long time ago, that in January I was giving a talk at This Is Wealth, or in March I was in Dubai recording for the podcast, or that in July I was made redundant and went full-time with coaching. When you consider that, I think as I get older, time is going faster in some ways, and I don't want to blink and be 40 and not have a good memory of everything that I've been up to. And I want to share with you some little hacks that have helped me to slow the passage of time and help you do the same. The first one is around novelty. I'm a creature of habit. I love routine, but having some novelty built into your week, your month, your quarters, and your halves, again, using wanky corporate terms, can help slow the pace of time. Sometimes that can be a particular holiday or a trip that have bookmarked your year. For me, it's been maybe milestone podcast guests, or recently some of the bigger talks or events that I've spoken at when it's come to sales. These can chunk up your year and make it seem longer and more varied. Because if we do just get into a routine where we do the same things every day, and an example of this is somebody could ask you about your commute last Tuesday to the office, you wouldn't be able to tell them anything notable because you did that commute every day for the last however long, and you couldn't have told anything unless perhaps that day the train was delayed, or some crazy person got on the train and was talking to you, or there was a car crash in front of you on the way. Novelty helps us to slow the passage of time and earmark particular occasions. And again, I was speaking to one of my friends about this whole time thing recently, and we were joking that time passes at different rates depending what we're doing. So a sauna minute is longer than a minute talking to your friend, or a minute at the football. A microwave minute might be longer than a cardio minute, or an ice bath minute, or a minute that you spend watching TV or scrolling on your phone on TikTok. Time, yes, is an arbitrary unit and measurement. 60 seconds within a minute, 60 minutes within an hour, 24 hours within a day. But it is always moving at different paces, and we can have a little bit of control around that, because I think we want to spend our time well and remember and enjoy as much of it as possible. I think that's a good life, to feel like you're spending the time on your terms and you're enjoying it, and you aren't necessarily chasing time down in terms of hoping for the weekend, or wishing for the weekend, or wishing for the holiday in 2 weeks' time. But something that I've found really helpful during 2025 has been having, for example, the big talk at This Is Wealth in January was a milestone. Being in Dubai in March was a milestone. Holidays in Ibiza in August, and Mallorca in September. And milestone guests like Andrew Craig coming back on the show in London, the first time we did it in person. Having that set out within your year can really help to spread the passage of time and not make it feel like you're on this hamster wheel and that you're going to blink and you're whatever age. For me, the next big milestone for me is probably going to be 40 at 33. That's the next one that people are going to talk about and think about. When we consider how we can slow that passage of time, I think we can live a better, more aligned and intentional life on our terms. And I would urge you to consider what you can do within your week or within your calendar that would allow you to have particular things that you're looking forward to, that you enjoy and you reflect upon. Because if I think back, it feels like an age since I was in Mallorca, and that was only in September just there. It feels like even longer ago that I was in Dubai in March, because the memories are all still fresh and they're there, but so much has happened since then. So let's try and build stuff into our life that stands out within the year, stands out within the calendar, and let's make sure that we don't have these mundane, boring, empty weeks where we feel like we've blinked and nothing's happened in our life whatsoever. Number 5, and I hope you all take this in the right way, but I'm really glad that I like myself because I've been doing a lot of self-reflection and assessment in recent months with all the different changes within the business, within my setup. And when I'm thinking about all these different things that are happening to me, and I'm maybe having a pause to reflect on a Sunday or maybe a Friday evening when the laptop goes off for a little while anyway, I'm really glad that I live in alignment with the version of myself that I say I am. Otherwise, I think some of the changes that I've gone through during this period would have been a lot more painful for me, because I would have had to reveal that I wasn't the guy that I thought I was in terms of resilience, in terms of focus, in terms of determination, in terms of action over anxiety. If that hadn't been the case, I'm quite worried about what my self-talk would have been like, because when you're pushed with an extreme event like a redundancy, maybe a bereavement, a breakup, everything starts to get questioned within yourself, and that's a good thing because we need to test our mettle. But when I reflect on the type of person I am and the way that I show up online, being in alignment with the way that I am in person, the way that I talk about myself, being in alignment with the way that I behave when the doors are closed, I'm really glad that there's not a discrepancy there, because I think I would have torn myself to bits. And I think a lot of people's potential unhappiness in life is a gap and a delta between the person that they hold themselves up as and the person that they act like in reality. The closer we can get that together, the better. And it sounds crazy, but I wrote in my notes, I'm really glad that I like the guy that I am. And as long as I keep reinforcing that identity with how I show up on a daily basis, how I conduct myself with friends, family, in particular, how I deal with strangers as well, or people that I'm bringing into my world, as long as I continue to be that guy, then I can look in the mirror and be content with that type of person and not feel like I'm a facade or I'm playing a persona or I'm playing a role. Because one of the first lessons I learned on the podcast was when I hosted Chris Williamson back in lockdown 2020, and he said the persona is incapable of receiving love. If I was to act a particular way on the podcast and it massively grew the show, but it was out of alignment with what I truly felt and believed, a lot of that success in those metrics would feel totally hollow. Whereas, as per point 1, you can't compete with somebody having fun. I'm having fun being the person that I say I am over and over and over again, whether it's on a coaching call with somebody, whether it's on a podcast with a guest, whether it's speaking down the mic to you just now. As long as I keep doing things that I'm proud of and that I'm happy with, then I'm going to continue to be able to like myself and look in the mirror and be like, okay, Colin, you're being the guy that you said you are. Keep going. Point number 6, you're not competing with everyone. You're competing with the survivors. Don't let the nuance around the sunk cost fallacy confuse you here, because remember, almost everyone, even in endeavors that they should continue with, will quit when it gets really hard. Whether that's a fitness pursuit, whether that's a business pursuit, whether that's a relationship pursuit, most people will drop off. The last man or the last woman standing can win and should win. Again, these points are not as easy to clip up and post on social media. That's why I do these on a longer form podcast, because of the nature of what I'm trying to say to you. The sunk cost fallacy is real. If there's something that's not serving you, cut ties and move on. But don't quit just because it's gotten hard. You're not competing with everyone. Everyone is at the start line, but very few people are there when there's a couple of laps left to go. We want to be in that last couple of laps, because that is where the victory, that is where the reward, that is where the return lies. You are competing with the survivors who have gone multiple rounds. If it's a boxing match, we're slugging it out in round 10, 11 and 12, trying to get the knockout, trying to get the points decision. Keep going. So many people are going to go all out and bounce around on round 1, round 2, round 3, and then they fall off. There's a stat that I used to share all the time, particularly when I was first launching my podcast masterclass course, which is a course on how you can start and scale your own podcast. It's still sat there on Thinkific, and actually I just had somebody enroll last week, which was great to see. But I used to share this stat that something like 90% of podcasts are gone by episode 7 or 8, and then another 8, 9, 10% have fucked off by episode 21. So you just have to remain in the game, get better over time at your pursuit, iterate on the different processes and things that you can action, but keep going, because you're not competing with everyone, you're competing with the survivors, and the survivors are going to be tough, so you need to be ready for that. Point number 7, and we'll crack the new tonic to caffeinate me and get me through the rest of this episode. Also, I'm sure there'll probably be a mid-roll ad in this episode for New Tonic, but given that New Tonic was founded by Chris Williamson, who was a massive part of me starting the show, and him and James Smith have created a productivity drink, the first of its kind, to have them as a sponsor in the show is really, really cool. So if you too want to feel your focus and get dialed in, then the link will be in the show notes, and Colin 10 is the discount code. Number 7, the mid-wit curve is real. For those of you not familiar, this is a meme online where the mid-wit curve shows how thinking has evolved over time from early days and prehistoric ideas, overcomplication in the middle, and then the right side being the more straightforward truths without overthinking. So the left side shows you accepting the simple, basic level common sense that we all generally know, straightforward truth without overthinking, but you don't have much knowledge of experience at that left-hand side. The middle shows you overcomplicating and indexing on every single little minutia, tiny little points, and rejecting some of the obvious truths because they seem too simple or too basic for where you're at. And then the right side shows you circling back in a boomerang moment to that left side, using the same principles, the same knowledge, the same common sense, and applying it. Except this time round on the right-hand side, you have the experience and the knowledge to fully embrace and agree with the simple truth. I've been through the mid-wit curve. Everyone's been through the mid-wit curve in many things in life and business. I think at the moment, in the mid-wit curve in terms of fitness, there's so many people in that middle bit that are obsessing over a particular number of sets or reps to do, or the timing of their protein, or how long to go in the ice bath for, or what their resting heart rate is on their whoop. Whereas the guys at the left and the right-hand side, they are just knowing that they need to train hard, recover well, eat enough protein, and crack on. In the middle, you're getting lost in the minutiae and trying to obsess over the minors. Yes, getting into the detail is important, but generally, the best possible answers sit in the basics at the left and the right-hand side for you to apply over and over again. In sales just now, I'm seeing so much AIfication of outreach. And it's around, oh, you must send the email at this particular time, and you must send it this particular sequence, or you must send these particular keywords or phrases. Whereas on the left-hand side and the right-hand side is an understanding that you must do a high volume of outreach with a quality message and a clear call to action, and that your message must resonate with your prospect based on their needs, requirements, and the solutions they're looking for. Whereas in the middle, you've got all these nerds online talking about integrating it with your Klaviyo or your fucking whatever AI app they're using. What we must do is simplify these things, whether it's fitness, whether it's sales, whether it's business. Do not get obsessed with the minutiae. Instead, look at the things that have stood the test of time in any domain that you're focused on, and don't necessarily fall into the trap of trying to become some sort of Jedi Master guru. And that's what the meme looks like. It's got the kind of guy with the hood up as a Jedi. Number 8, and I've managed to go almost half an hour without getting political. So here we go. You may not care about war, revolution, politics, but war, revolution, politics cares about you. That's a quote from Trotsky of all people. Who on earth thought I'd be quoting a communist on my podcast? But while I want Cambro to remain a self-development podcast, and I'm continuing to deliver those episodes that are self-development focused on your brain, your body, your business, I know a lot of you have reached out and appreciated the likes of the Eunice Rocks episode on radical Islam, and then elements of the economic and the immigration and the policy discussions that we had with Andrew Craig, David Bell, and then more recently Darren Grimes, who's just come out, and the Andrew Wade episode, which may or may not be out before this one. When you understand that war, revolution, and politics is something that will be impressed upon you whether you want to be interested in it or not, it should trigger you at this moment in time, particularly in the UK, to be more interested in these subjects. Now, I'm not saying that you need to obsess and spend all your time on this, but the barbarians are at the gate, and they're probably inside the gate if we consider the UK. So it's time to have these conversations and not be politically disengaged. I was politically really engaged throughout my school career, and then when I went to university to study politics, and then I completely fell away for it for a long time. I would still vote, but I wasn't politically active. I wasn't considered. I didn't think about these things. I just turned up the ballot box and voted for what I thought was best. In the last year to 18 months, given the state of the UK, I felt it's fundamental for me to use my platform to speak to people that are putting forward ideas, policies, solutions that we might want to vote for, albeit I still feel that we're not got that representation that we want from any political party at this moment in time. But ahead of the Scottish Parliament elections, ahead of the general election, which may come sooner rather than later, depending on what Starmer and his cronies get up to, we must be engaged enough to be able to speak about the political aspect. And from a war aspect, I think many people have dabbled in this space in the last year or two with a selection of the facts that may not be the most helpful for them. But having a more general awareness will enable us to have these conversations from an educated perspective, speak to our friends, speak to our family, speak to people who are politically not turning up at the ballot box, because when these elections come, we will need people to turn out who want the best for the UK and have a vision for it moving forward that aren't necessarily just somebody that says that voting's a scam. Now, it may feel like voting is a scam, and there's times when I've felt that completely democratically unelected. However, you may not care about politics right now, but war and politics and revolution care about you. And Trotsky is not somebody I would ever recommend listening to. However, he has a very, very good point there. We must remain conscious. We must have these conversations. If you've not listened to any of the political episodes I've had out there, I don't judge you for that, but pop it on the background at some point, see what you think, engage your mind, engage your body, engage your thoughts, and see what you think the best version of the UK looks like and who might serve us to do that. Number 9, model the rise, not the result. So many things that we see online are from somebody who's already reached a point that we want to get to. And sometimes when they reflect on how they got to that point or where they're at just now or the things that they're doing now at point Z in the alphabet rather than when they're at point A or B is actually really damaging. And this was something that Chris Williamson and Matthew McConaughey were speaking about on episode 1000 of Modern Wisdom, which was a great episode. Really, really enjoyed it. They were speaking about how it can be really challenging to hear from a guru or a successful business person or somebody that's smashing it in their space, and you hear how their life or their diary is set up at the point they're at, not at the point when they were building, perhaps closer to the position that you're in. And this comes into exercise and physique. I always used to laugh. You would see Steve Cook post his chest workout when he'd already been training for 15, 20 years. So there's absolutely no reason to take seriously or take on board exactly what he's doing with 15, 20 years of training plus everything else he's been doing and copy his routine word for word or line by line. Instead, we want to look at what these people were doing in their building phase. How were they behaving? What were they eating? What were they training? How were they recovering? That is more valuable than copying somebody when they're already perhaps the finished article. If somebody looks at my training split now, it's a lot more top set, back off set, 2 sets of really, really high intensity because I've got really good experience at nailing my form and taking it to failure. Whereas for a less experienced trainee, they might want to do 3 or 4 sets of a movement and accumulate a bit more volume without the same injury risk. If you take on board the advice of somebody who has maybe been an expert in their field for 10 years and is showing what they're doing in the modern day, not what they were doing on the come up and the build, you are modeling the result, not the rise. Instead, we must model the rise and copy or at least take advice from what they were doing in the early stages. It's the exact same in business and finance. People talk about, Warren Buffett makes 2 trades or 3 trades a year. Okay, but Warren Buffett is playing with a much bigger pot than you ever will. So the swing on that or the result on that is so much bigger. If you're somebody that's got a direct debit of 300, 400, 500 pounds a month into your Vanguard or into your H&L, you probably shouldn't be taking investing tips from Warren Buffett. Instead, model the rise, not the result. What were these people doing in the early days when they were in a more similar position to you? How were they behaving? How were they acting? If I think about how the podcast is now, if somebody mentions to me about starting a podcast, in fact, I mentioned Sammy's just signed up for the podcast masterclass on Thinkific, I'm giving advice that showed what I did in years 0 to 3 to build it into the top 1% podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. I'm not talking about what I'm doing now, where I go to London, I go to Dubai, I have a solo podcast set up in here in the Green Room in Glasgow, and I'm bashing out those episodes. I was building it on remote recordings on StreamYard and Zoom, and I was using a cheaper editing software rather than outsourcing my editing. I was using cheaper thumbnails than I do now. Model the rise of how somebody got to where you want them to get to, not necessarily where they are now, and copying that. Remember, especially when somebody who's really successful is preaching balance to you, you must recognize they probably were not remotely balanced in their approach when it came to building what they're doing. If I talk to you about my sales coaching business just now, I am not even slightly balanced. I am extreme in my focuses and my efforts to try and build it. Maybe in 3-4 years' time, I'll be a bit more balanced and I can talk about, oh, well, this is how I structure my days and my weeks, where I don't take calls after 6 p.m. or I don't take calls on a Friday and I purely spend time on the golf course on a Friday networking. That is not what's happening right now. In the rise of my sales coaching business, I'm being extreme. There's no balance whatsoever. In the future, when it's on an equilibrium that I'm happier with and I'm able to sustain it more rather than I'm being more in maintenance and in growth mode, then I'll be able to talk about the result. But anyone building a business should look at the rise, not the result. Number 10 is linked to this one, and it is, in order to understand moderation, you have to restrict first. As mentioned previously, I prefer to live life at the extremes in most domains of my life. However, if you are seeking some form of balance in the longer term, it's important to go full tilt and go to the full extent of something and explore truly what it looks like and what results it can give you. I think a fitness example is easiest to give. If you do a really concerted, hard 12-week calorie deficit cut, losing body fat, where you're really strict, you count all your macros, you count your steps, you track your training, you track your sleep, you don't go on any meals out, you don't drink, your result will be so good and so much better than if you just dipped your toe in and did 80-20. You may get to a stage, and I would expect you will get to a stage, and we spoke about this on the episode with Alex Caldwell and David Hatt, which is called Get Jacked and Lean. We spoke about once you go extreme for a while and you understand what your body's capable of and the result you can generate, you will also start to establish which of those behaviors have the highest return and the highest benefits. And those are what you can keep when you go into a more moderate, more balanced phase. So in order to understand what moderation might look like for you moving forward that will get you the most bang for your buck and the most value on the activities and the things that you do, you must first go to the extreme end and restrict a little bit more than you want to so you can understand what that might look like. Again, to think about the sales business just now, I'm taking calls left, right, and fucking Chelsea because I need to. In the future, it might be a case if I shut my diary off at particular times, I won't work with a US client unless it's on a particular day of the week where I'll book out my diary later on. I'm actually doing what's called fractional sales director, which is me working one day a week for a client. And some of the calls are later on because they've got people in Australia on their roster of potential clients. And that's absolutely fine because at this moment in time, I'm restricting a little bit in other areas of my life so I can grow this other area of my life and make it all happen. In the future, I can maybe move back towards moderation once I understand what's necessary and what's possible and what the big rocks are within the jar that fill it out and get the most return. But right now, in the jar, I've put the big rocks in, the small rocks in, and there's sand filling in between the holes as well because I'm doing everything I can to make it happen. So when you've got a goal, fitness, relationships, business, whatever it is, go to the extreme end first. Cover all the gaps. Cover everything. Go right in. And then in time, you can earn the right to strip back the things that might not be necessary, but are more punishing or more punitive. Do you want to turn your LinkedIn into a selling machine rather than a time sink? Well, that's exactly what I'm helping you do with my step-by-step guide that shows you exactly how I built my brand, generated inbound leads, and turned my network into paying clients. It covers everything on how to write your profile, post structure and templates you can use, as well as outbound messages to your ideal clients to book meetings with them. This is the exact framework that I've used myself and teach inside my coaching program, condensed into one short, actionable guide that you can implement straight away. You can grab your copy at the link in the show notes or DM me on Instagram or LinkedIn, the word guide, and I'll send it straight to you. Point number 11, prove yourself to yourself, not to others. A lot of conduct that we see online is people trying to show others who they are and what they're doing and what they're achieving. But if you can go back to the basic premise of what you're doing being for you, you'll be far more content. There's that famous James English clip where him and a guest, they go back and forth and they say, nobody cares, bro. And for those of you that aren't Scottish, that's him saying that nobody cares about what you're up to. And that is true to a large extent. If you post your 5K time on your story, or your progress photo on your story, or the fact you've just won a new client on your LinkedIn page, people will consume it in that moment and then they'll move on with their busy lives. So what's far more important, rather than proving yourself to others, is prove yourself to yourself. I, of course, encourage all my clients that I work with to post a lot of social proof and a lot of testimonials and results on their story. However, it's far more important that you're proving yourself to yourself rather than trying to flex online and get validation. I read a quote that relates to this from a fiscal perspective, and it's from Dan Martell. He said, "Every dollar spent on looking rich is a dollar not working for you." I'll say that again. Every dollar spent on looking rich is a dollar not working for you. If you're trying to prove yourself to others, you may buy things or flex on things don't actually serve you or aren't actually things that you wanted. Instead, spend that time on yourself. I've been around people recently who've gone to do particular endurance events or particular strength events or particular, again, this was really common back in the day, but a lot of people used to do bodybuilding competitions almost to prove to people on Instagram that they could get shredded and get the validation of standing on stage. And then afterwards, they would realize that it was all for nothing and it wasn't something that they truly deeply cared about. If you are doing things in your life to prove yourself to other people, it will feel hollow when you get there. I mentioned the lesson I learned on episode 1 of this podcast. The persona is incapable of receiving love. If you are doing things to get love from others when it's not a true, authentic version of yourself, then you will not feel the same as if you're doing things that are truly for you. And of course, if positive reinforcement comes along the way, that's fantastic. Recently, with the episodes in London going so well, I've had a lot of people reach out on LinkedIn and give me some really sincere praise. And episode 330 was obviously a really raw one for me. So hearing back from people felt great, because during that time, I wasn't doing that to prove myself to others. I was doing that episode to prove myself to myself, to show who I am, to say who I am, and to share my journey and what I'm up to. The praise and the support off the back of it was just a happy byproduct. It wasn't what I was chasing. It wasn't what I wanted. Yes, I enjoyed receiving it, but it wasn't the only reason I was doing it. So consider in your life just now what pursuits you're undertaking that are being done in the wrong way. Again, to break the wall with you, I'm planning on going to Dubai in December. And when I told a couple of boys in the group chat, they were like, "Oh, you'll get the business flight to put it on the gram." I can't bring myself to do that, because that wouldn't be for me. I wouldn't be doing that for me. I think at some point in time, I would love to fly business. I'm sure it's very enjoyable to lie in the bed rather than sit in the economy seat for 7 hours. But I can't bring myself to spend that money because it would let me post it. And I hope that makes sense. I really hope that if I really ever do want to fly business and it seems like it's something that's really important to me, and maybe I want to be fresh for landing and doing a podcast that day or whatever, I would have to justify it to myself first, not to the people on Instagram that might like my story or say, "Class bro, congrats, you're flying busy." That's not what it's all about. So that would be me spending $1 trying to look rich. Whereas the dollar that I want to spend, I'd rather get a nicer apartment or go out for a nicer dinner in Dubai or book an extra podcast studio with another great guest that I can have on. And I'm doing that to prove myself to myself, not to others or to flex on the gram. Number 12, and I'll take a quick drink. I want to share with you something called Stein's Law. And this is from 1986. And it reads as follows. If something cannot go on forever, it will stop. And I'm going to rephrase that to apply it to what's happening in the UK just now. Something that can't go on won't. We are at that point in the UK. The situation that we're in cannot continue to go on as it is. It will have to change. Now, it could get worse, it could get better, but it quite simply will not continue in the trajectory it's on just now, because tempers, feelings, and emotions are at boiling point. If we apply Stein's Law, we recognize that what is happening right now is unsustainable. So something that cannot go on forever, which this can't, it will stop. The UK is on a precipice. That's why I'm doing more political episodes. I'm angry. I'm fired up. I think a lot of you are too, based on the messages that I'm getting. But it cannot go on forever. And we must try and find a positive way for it to go forward. So the episode with Andrew Wade, he talked a lot about some of the policies that we can look at when he hopefully has some sort of political representation in the future and he's involved in government. That is what's coming down the line. So it cannot go on forever. It will not go on forever. It's that sort of raging beta paradox that I've spoken on the podcast before, potentially with Rory Sutherland in that episode. I think I covered it with him anyway. But basically, when something is so bad, it forces change. If something's just okay or average, or it's just a little bit rubbish, people don't make change. But things are getting so bad now, particularly for the productive people in the UK that are paying a lot of tax and not getting value for their money in terms of safety, support, and how our culture is being looked after. It's gotten to a point where we are at a tipping point and things will change. Let's just make sure that when it tips, it goes the way that we want it to and not the other way. Okay, I've started politically, so I'll carry on. 13. Digital ID is the hill to die on. When I talk about hills to die on, it is the thing to potentially lose what you're holding on to right now, because what you're holding on to right now is worth holding on to. Your freedom, your ability to make choices on your own terms, your ability to have privacy from the state and from the government and from these large multinational corporate organizations. Digital ID is the end of freedom as we know it. You must resist it at all costs. And that includes if your employer threatens you that you can't have a job if you don't have digital ID. It includes those of you that sold yourself out and took the C19 vaccine in order to go on holiday. It includes those of you that are worried about not being able to buy food at the supermarket or whatever it is that they're going to enforce if you don't have digital ID. Mass civil disobedience and mass non-compliance is the only way to stop this. If you sign up for digital ID, if you take the digital ID and you think it's a necessary evil, then the evils that will unfold off the back of it will be great. If you haven't already noticed, your food labelling in the UK now has your carbon emissions score on it. That is a slippery slope. Digital ID will lead to a social credit system, will lead to you having a central bank digital currency, which will be digitally controlled and allow you to spend on what they allow you to spend on. That sounds conspiratorial, but at this point in time, most of the people I consider conspiracy theorists in the past are now just prediction machines. If your carbon footprint is on the food that you buy, that will calculate a score which will allow you a particular allowance for you to spend it on, as will be the case with your fuel allowance in terms of what you spend at the pump and how much you drive your car, with how much you take public transport, with how many taxis you get, with how many flights you get on per year. That is what's coming down the line, all under the guise of the quote-unquote climate crisis, which is a fucking massive scam. You must resist digital ID. And I don't often tell you what to do in this podcast, but if you fold at this and you allow this to expand and control, totalitarianism, communism, and a complete stripping of your freedom and your privacy is what's coming down the line. You just have to look at China. And again, there's actually an advert out for, I'm trying to remember what the brand is. It might be Plantire or whatever that's called, the stock in the US. And it shows the dystopian future where a lady gets locked out of her car, she gets locked out in her apartment, people come to her house over her social media posts and she loses points in her social credit score and she's basically begging to try and get given credit so she can buy food. And she can't buy the beef, she has to buy the worms. That sounds dystopian, but that's exactly what we're heading towards because the elites are fully signed up on WEF Agenda 2030, where you will own nothing and be happy. I genuinely, when I first heard about this stuff, laughed and shook my head. But if you've read 1984 by George Orwell, you will see that's what we've moved towards under this Labour government, and that's where we're heading if we don't change our path. Digital ID is one of the first tests for that. If you do not resist it, you and I and your family are not going to live the lifestyle that you want to live. So refuse, mass disobedience, push back. Number 14, a lighter note. People who feel good about themselves make other people feel good too. The opposite is also true. Keep that in mind. Watch closely how you feel around other people. Are they people who make you feel good and you make them feel good? Because often how they make you feel is a reflection of how they feel about themselves. If I look at some of the comments that come through on TikTok, when I'm probably talking about personal responsibility, accountability, health and wellness, money and finance, the people who are getting angriest in the comments, I don't hate them. They hate me, but it's often because they hate themselves. Their external expression of how they feel about themselves internally is coming out through anger, bile, and vitriol. I feel really sorry for those people. And if you can be around more people who make you feel good about you and you make them feel good about themselves, we create a more holistic and enjoyable environment to be within. The vast majority of people I spend 90% of my time with are all people that make me feel good about myself. They're complimentary, they're supportive, they're challenging in the right ways when necessary. Remember, I spoke about Chris Burns, David Hatt, Bryce Bell on that last podcast when I talked about going self-employed. They challenged me in the right ways, but they also made me feel good about the ventures that I was going to undertake. Let's get around more people who feel good about themselves because they want to give that same feeling to you. Whereas those that feel bad about themselves want to bring you down a peg or two. They want to chin you down. They want you to take digital ID and not be able to go on holiday next year because they can't go on holiday because they've not saved up enough money or earned enough money. That is where this is going. So spend time with people around yourself that make you feel good, and best believe they probably have a good internal dialogue as well. And one of the interesting observations that I've had of my coaching clients up till now is that particularly when they're moving into maybe more salesy roles within a career, or they're moving into more sales within their own business, how much they benefit from just being around somebody that's high energy and positive. And that's one of the bits of feedback that I get in the testimonials. It's not always just about the frameworks and the processes and the structures that I'm giving them. A lot of the time it's about the energy they get coming off the back of the call, where they jump into that next afternoon work block after our morning call and they're energized, they're excited to do the LinkedIn post, to send the new cold emails, to do the full cold follow-up calls, to book that next discovery meeting, to send that next proposal. Because my energy, as much as possible, I feel good about myself. I want to make them feel good about themselves, and I want that energy to compound. And the frequency that I'm trying to put out there is great. And I hope when you listen to a podcast, again, I've made some horrible serious points in this one, but I hope the general theme of this podcast is positive and that you feel good about yourself off the back of it, because I feel fucking good about myself and I want you to feel that same way. So let's be around more people that are like that. Number 15, as I age, I realize that implementation and adaptability is the highest form of intelligence. Knowledge and understanding matters, but the ability to learn, unlearn, change, implement something new matters far, far more. So if we relentlessly cling on to what we knew before and we know it's not the way to succeed, we must learn to adapt and implement when presented with new information, and that is a vital skill. So true intelligence in the highest form is when presented with information that enables you to change course or adapt approach or do something new. Those of us that action that quickly and learn from implementation, not just from consumption, the future belongs to those who remain a student, those who are constantly trying to take on new information and new ways of working and new ways of getting better. And then those of us that action what we've learned, we will be the leaders of the future. We will be the ones that win down the line. Number 16, know yourself and others by their deeds, not their words. I've witnessed this in myself, and I mentioned that whole point that I'm glad that I live in alignment because it means that I feel like I like myself and I'm happy with how I conduct myself. But there's always a story and a narrative about our life and what we're going to do, how we see ourselves, and how the life that we lead. However, that story must be accurate and alignment with the actions, habits, and routines. And those actions and habits, routines must have an intention behind them that sits within that. When I mentioned about liking myself, I think at the core of being content with who I am comes from knowing that the things that I actually do are in alignment with the things that I say. And I don't just say them and then go off and not do them. In most cases, we typically have a narrative that's an idealized version of ourselves, which we talk about, we verbalize, we hold out there on social media, but there may be a gap with that in reality. And that gap is us falling short of the expectation of ourselves. And the gap between our expectations and our reality is where happiness lies. And I'd refer you back to the first episode I did with David Robson on the expectation effect was really, really helpful for how people's expectation of themselves often shapes what they end up doing down the line. A lot of my true inner confidence, not arrogance, not bravado, but when I truly feel confident and assured of who I am, comes from keeping promises that I made to myself in private in the ways that I show up in public. The easiest examples always fall back to health and wellness, don't they? So going for the walk in the morning before I log on, even if it's pouring wet and it's cold and freezing, doing the extra 2 reps in Bulgarian squats because I've said that I wanted to progress a movement that I know is really hard and horrible, but I know it benefits my legs and my strength down the line. It's doing an extra practice run for the talk that I'm giving to the Academy Players at Harlequins next month and making sure that it's as fluent and as good as possible. It's listening to that extra podcast with a guest that's coming up if I can find another angle that I want to ask them about. It's doing the things that I know would be the best version of myself, even if I know nobody's watching. It's a private victory that leads to a public victory as well. It's a private win in silence that leads to something in public which shows that I am who I say I am. So stack those private wins, stack those behind closed doors victories, and then down the line in the future, you're going to know yourself by your deeds and who you really are, not just the words and the way that you show up and you hold yourself. Number 17, and we're in the home straight just now, 10 minutes to go. Set the standards and hold others to them. This is a variation of something I shared last year in my 23 Thoughts at 32, when I said, you teach people how to treat you. From both personal experience in the last year and also a front row seat to the relationships and the dynamics that my friends are in, and even some of the business partnerships and relations that I've seen between boss and employee, I can firmly say that you show what you expect somebody to treat you as and how you expect them to conduct themselves early on, and you set the tone from that standard. And if you avoid difficult conversations early on, or if you avoid setting your standards or your expectations at the start, then you're going to have a lot of circling back and chasing to do, and often you never get back to where you want it to be. And Dr. Julie Gurnow, who's been a 2-time guest on Cambro, and I'm very hopeful of getting Dr. G back on soon, she had this wonderful visual explanation, and she called it fight up front. And she gave this example: if you're being dragged into a van about to be kidnapped, you're better to go all out right then, because things are only going to get worse. So you must fight up front. Don't risk getting put into the van, because things are only going to get worse when you go inside or wherever they're going to take you to. So treat your relationships, your friendships, your business partnerships in the same way. If a conflict is potentially looming early, have the fight or the discussion or the difficult chat early. Communicate what you will and won't tolerate. And when your standards are clear, respect follows down the line from that. If you don't set your standards early, if you don't lay out what your expectations are, you cannot be as annoyed if somebody doesn't meet them or if they fall below those. And I'm going to talk about a couple of personal learning experiences that I've never shared before on the show, because they come from the world of dating, which I very rarely talk about on the podcast. Firstly, last December, I was about to go to Dubai. I'd been on 2 dates with a girl that I was seeing at the time, but it hadn't developed into anything. We hadn't had any particularly serious conversations. It was just light and fun. We'd been on 2 very casual dates, and while we've gotten well, we hadn't really had any further conversations. And it was very, very early. But before I went, she simply said to me, "Have fun in Dubai. Hope it's great for your podcast. Hope you have fun with your friend Bryce. And I hope you enjoy training in the sun and all that good stuff. But I want you to know that I don't share." And I smiled, because we hadn't had that conversation prior to that. And if we hadn't had that conversation, I had pretty much every intention of, if I wanted to, going out on dates in Dubai, meeting girls at the beach club, doing whatever I wanted to do, dropping the hinge there and seeing what the talent market was like, which, if you know Dubai, it was very, very good. But because she said, "I want you to know I don't share," I knew that that was a red line, and one that I couldn't cross. And as it transpired, I didn't cross that line when I was in Dubai, and I went on to see her for another couple of months after that. Things didn't 100% work out through no fault of that conversation. But she drew a particular boundary and an expectation early on, and I had to choose whether I met that or not. And if I didn't meet that, then it was off. I chose to meet that, and things continued, and I gave it a chance to blossom. So that was very, very important. And then if I go further back to another lesson in terms of setting standards and expectations early, during late 2020, when we were in and out of restrictions, I was dating a girl who was really quite spiritual, and it's the first girl I've ever really spoken to that was in that sort of mindset. And she was reading a book about the 5 love languages. So physical touch, quality time, receiving gifts, acts of service, and then words of affirmation. And very early on, she was explaining to me how she liked to receive love in terms of those love languages, what her preference was around receiving gifts and acts of service, and then how she liked to express love and give love to me, who she was dating at the time as well. And by her communicating that, I knew what she liked. And interestingly enough, down the line, she said that I wasn't very good at giving words of affirmation. She said I was really good at giving quality time, and that's actually one of the ways that I think if I reflect about these love languages and that sort of concept, that I actually like to give love. If I'm assigning time and energy to somebody, it's a real sign that I like them and I care about them. Whereas if I'm more distant and making myself unavailable, that's a sign that I'm not investing in them. But by her talking about that early on and raising the points that she liked and how she was going to behave from her perspective, and I could then give my tuppence worth and my preference on it as well, it sets the standard. So 17 is all about set the standard and hold others to them and do it as early as possible. My journey into self-employment recently and growing the podcast has been fueled by Newtonic, and so can your ventures too. A caffeine-based drink, but with so much more nootropics and other adaptogens in there to really fuel your focus and your performance. I've been drinking the drink since they got released back in 2023, and I cannot recommend them highly enough. If you want to fuel your focus and kick on in whatever your pursuit is, whether it's podcasting like me, whether it's sales coaching, whatever it is you're turning your hand to, this will fuel your gains. Hit the link in the show notes for newtonic.com and use the code Colin10 for 10% off your first order. Okay, last two, and this number 18 is a really practical one that I think will help for anyone that's trying to make a change or trying to make improvements in their life. And it's start where your feet are. I think many of us that are excited about the things that we want to work on or the goals that we've got can get carried away and aim for a radical change, and we can potentially, to use an earlier one, we can model the result, not the rise. So let's consider what the rise could look like and start where your feet are and start to stack small wins that will compound over time. Remember, if we're building a wall, as Donald famously said, we want to build it brick by brick. What can I do today that will help me win today? What's the first brick that I can put down? What's the first step that I can take? What new habits can I start to form which will take me closer to the version of myself that I want to be? Remember that we have a particular start point, and there will be a journey that we'll go on to laying the first brick, the next brick, and the one after that. If we can stack those daily wins, start where our feet are, and progress slowly but firmly and with intention to where we want to get to, we will start to build those as habits. The things that we're doing initially at the start that feel like small wins will become second nature to us, so we can then move on to the bigger wins, the more challenging things. This will likely get more complicated or harder over time, but find ones which we can scale up and progressively overload as we move forward. My point on moderation and going extreme still stands, but you must give yourself a chance to build up to that extreme success in a domain. You must scale up, progressively overload. You won't go from A to Z overnight. You won't blink and be running 20-minute 5Ks or have lost the 15 kg of fat that took you 2.5 years to put on. You're not going to blink and that's going to be off in 5 weeks. Start where you currently are. Make clear positive steps with intent to move forward. Scale those steps to become harder, more difficult over time, albeit they'll become easier as you build your capacity. And your shift can happen very quickly indeed, as the time is going to pass anyway. Like I said, time's a social construct. It's just flying past. Goodness knows what's going on. We might as well spend it in our desired way. Let's wrap up on number 19. I'll take a quick drink and we'll finish. I always get a bit reflective when I'm feeling a bit older, and 33 does feel a little bit older, albeit I still feel like I'm in my youth. And number 18 is that you're about to write the next chapter. Let's make it a good one. So no matter what you've done just now, up until this point, wherever you are at the book of your life, you're actually still relatively early in real terms. We underestimate how much life is left to live. The new versions of us that are to come, the new ambitions, the new people to meet, the new realities we're going to create. And we love to believe that life is linear. That's not true. Things don't go up in a straight line. In fact, they go in a bit of a curve. Look at my year, for example, where things went in a bit of a funny curve, albeit we're in an upward trajectory again now. But many of us think that by our 30s, our 40s, or our 50s, that our path is set, that the story is written and we're stuck to that. And the next few chapters are likely to be predictable. But the truth is, every time you make a new decision, you learn a new skill, you step into a new environment, you take up a new hobby, you're writing a fresh chapter. Do not for a second believe that whatever stage you're at, or however far you're into the book of your life, that you're set, that this is how it's always going to be. Because the truth is, it's still very, very early indeed. And there is so much that can change. You could make 2 or 3 small micro decisions and things could be radically different in 6, 12, 18 months' time. So as I wrap up this podcast in a bit of a reflective, a bit of a spiritual mood, I want you to consider what plot twist is coming next for you. Do you want it to be a major one? Are you unhappy and does it need to be a major one? Or are you pretty happy, but there's just a few small things you want to work on? It could be a small upward trend that you're about to write in next. Or it could be something that's radically different. It could be a big plot twist. This next chapter, for me, 33 to 34, is not written yet. And that's the beauty of it. The chapter 32 to 33 was different from I expected. There was a few curveballs in there, but I still wrote the chapter with intention. I still made choices that were on my terms. So consider that. Don't worry for a single second that your best life or your best work is behind you, because we have so much agency and control that we're going to take over what's to come. And almost all of it is in our hands or in our writing hand, so to speak. And we can shape what's about to come down the line. So on that note, I want to say a massive thank you for your continued support of the show. The show has grown massively over the last 3, 4, 5 weeks with the different episodes that we've had from that London tour. And even the more recent one with local guests like Taylor McDonald and the boys, Jez and Jod from PRTY. So thank you so much. Please do keep showing your support for me. Show your support for the sponsors like Pure Sport and Newtonic, where the discount codes will be in there, because that helps me to fund and keep progressing the show. And I cannot wait for the next few months of 2026 as we go into that. And I want to say a massive thank you. We'll be back to Speak It All again very, very soon.